Hey everyone, we're here today to talk about the brand new bidirectional SDI HDMI 12G converter from Blackmagic Design. This is their new converter that was just announced very short time ago, a few weeks ago, and finally got a hold of a couple of them. And we'll talk about what this is capable of doing, as well as how it differs from some of the other products that are in Blackmagic's lineup. So before we go too far into that, let's just take a very quick tour of what's included on the device. So if we look over here on the left side, we've got an HDMI input, an HDMI output, and then on the opposite side there's an SDI input, SDI output, and then a USB-C connection, and that provides power and also gives you a way to configure the device if it's connected to a computer. So one of the cool things about this is you're able to convert in both directions simultaneously. So you're able to convert from HDMI to SDI and from SDI to HDMI at the same time with a single device. And the cool thing about that is it doesn't have to be the same format. So you can be converting a 4K signal on HDMI and then converting a 1080p signal on SDI to HDMI simultaneously. It doesn't care what the input and output formats are. They can be different, they can be at the same whatever. They don't have to be in sync, they don't have to be the same frame rate, anything goes basically. So any format that these devices support, you can convert both directions at the same time. Doesn't matter if those signals match. Now, one of the other cool things about this is that if one of the inputs is not being used, you're able to essentially do a pass-through or splitting of the signal. Say, for example, if I plug a signal into the SDI input and I don't have anything on the HDMI input, then that signal that's on the SDI will go to both the HDMI output and the SDI output simultaneously. So, say for example, I wanted to hook this up to a computer with an HDMI connection, and I needed to pass the output of that through to a monitor. So I could have signal from my laptop coming into the HDMI in, have the HDMI out go to the monitor for that computer, and at the same time that same signal is going to be sent out the SDI output as well. So very quick, very easy, very cool, easy way to connect between a computer and a monitor and be able to get that signal included in a video production system without interrupting the flow or having to use multiple converters at the same time. Now that's a feature that's actually been on their prior version. So like this, here's the 3 gig SDI version of it. Same, very similar product. Just the difference between these is, the main difference between these is that the 12 gig version will do 4K at up to 60 frames per second, whereas the 3G version only does 1080p at up to 60 frames per second in either direction. But there are actually some other subtle differences that are not necessarily mentioned in the manual or on the advertising literature for these products. So for example, they've actually added a number of features to the 12G version that don't exist in the 3G version at all. The first of which is applying a color lookup table, or LUT, to the outputs. And so you haven't realized it, but you've actually been watching a version of this video that's going through a LUT. So let's take a quick look at what's going on with that. Now I'm going to jump over to the computer, and we'll go into the software, and once I jump in here and go over to the LUTs tab, you can see that I have a LUT that's imported. It's called Light Contrast, and that's being applied to the camera image that you're seeing. And if I, for example, click on the SDI checkbox here to turn that off, you'll notice that my image becomes ever so slightly less contrasty than it was. So it's a very subtle LUT, but that's something that this bidirectional converter can do that the old 3G version could not. So that's something that they've added in the newer version of this product. Now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to load in a LUT that has a lot more of an effect to it. So I'm going to load desaturate 75, and you're going to see here when that loads that my image is going to become there we go, very desaturated compared to what it was before. So these boxes actually allow you to apply a color lookup table from a cube file in real time. Now I should mention, let me turn this off here real quick. I should mention that the SDI to HDMI version of this converter, the 3G version, could apply some lookup tables, but they were limited to the 17-point cubes. The new 12G version will do a 33-point cube, which is kind of the most common of the lookup tables that are out there. And if you go to download LUTs on the internet, they're probably going to be the 33-point LUTs. So they will work very easily with the 12G, whereas you would have to go through some sort of conversion in order to use those with the 3G of the SDI to HDMI. I should mention, though, that the bidirectional version of the 3G does not have that capability. It was only the SDI to HDMI. That's something they've added to the bidirectional 12G is the ability to do color LUTs. Now, before I leave the software utility, I'm going to take you on a quick tour of what else is here and talk about some of what these options are. So we go to the Setup tab here. We can see that it shows the name of the converter, and you're able to rename that. That's very handy if you happen to have multiple of these converters connected to a single computer, so you can tell which one is which. If you're connecting to a bunch of cameras, you'd want to label those according to which camera it was connected to, for example. The next option that we're going to see in here is one to set the ATEM camera ID. And now this is used for situations where you're controlling a Blackmagic camera from a Blackmagic switcher. And traditionally that has been done with switchers that have SDI, being used with cameras that also were using SDI. With the advent of the ATEM Mini and the Blackmagic, and being able to control the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema cameras, there's situations where you don't have SDI and only HDMI is available. Like, for example, if you want to control the Pocket Cinema cameras, either the 4K, 6K, or 6K Pro, which only have HDMI inputs from a switcher which only has SDI, such as the Production Studio and Constellation, you're able to use one of these bidirectional converters in order to issue those control commands. So be able to control color correction, issue tally, so turn your little tally indicator light green or red when a camera is on preview or on program, among other things, controlling focus and zoom and some other things, iris. Now that's not new, that's not unique to this particular product. The 3G version is also able to do that. And it should suffice because the Pocket Cinema camera only can do 1080p, and the ATEM Minis can only do 1080p. So if you got HDMI in the mix, you're only going to be doing 1080p anyway. So in those situations, the 3G version of this converter is going to work just fine. But in situations where you want to have one that can do both 4K and do that conversion, the 12G version of the converter is able to do that. When you do that, you make sure that you set a unique camera ID here in the setup, so that the switcher is able to address each camera specifically. So when you're controlling camera 2, it's actually adjusting camera number 2. The next option we have in here is to set the 3 gig SDI output level. There's choices between level A and level B. If you're using Blackmagic gear, level B is going to be the norm. My Sony cameras also do SDI 3G level B, but there's a lot of video equipment out there that actually uses level A instead. And so if you happen to be using equipment that requires level A, you're able to set the SDI output on here, and bring that into focus a little bit. Yeah, you're able to set the SDI output on here to use level A for compatibility with those devices. The device will accept both level A and B, so you don't need to do anything special in order to have a level A signal go into the input. But if you need a specific format on the output, you're able to set that here in the SDI output option. Next one here, HDMI output. We've got options to clip the signal to normal levels or to extend out to what's called illegal levels. So basically the gist of this is that video is able to extend past white and black in professional settings. When you move to consumer, you don't want to be doing that. And in most situations, you're using consumer equipment. You want to leave this on normal levels. There may be some situations where you want to be able to output illegal levels, although that's going to be rare. So for the most part, you're going to want to leave this on normal levels and just not touch that option. It defaults to normal, so you'll see. So you'll be able to use this with consumer equipment. Next thing, this is kind of unique. I haven't seen this on any of the other Blackmagic design. It's audio mapping. Let me zoom in a little bit and make this a little easier to read. Yeah, so for audio mapping, you can either use SMPTE standards or set to the consumer standards. And that's basically the order of channel levels for surround sound. And the SMPTE standards has left, right, center, then low frequency effects, and then the consumer has left, right, low frequency effects, and then center. So those two channels are actually reversed. So if you happen to need to change that, you can actually do that through this audio mapping feature here. So other than that, that's actually all of the options that are available in the setup software for this converter. Now, with that said, let's actually dive in. And I want to show you a couple of unique use cases for this, especially one that's not discussed anywhere in the sales documentation or in the manual anywhere. Alright, as I spent some time testing this device, I was kind of surprised to find out that it includes a feature that's not available in any of their other bidirectional converters, and it's not available in any of their other microconverters until this new 12 gig line. And that feature is the ability to downscale 4K content to 1080p. So what I've got going on here is this monitor that's just behind me is only capable of displaying a 1080p signal. It will not do anything with 4K. It's just not capable. What I have going into the SDI input on the converter is the 4K signal being output by my camera that I'm shooting on here right now. So I have a 4K signal going in. The bidirectional converter is down converting that to 1080p and sending that over to this monitor behind me. So that's a very cool, very nifty feature that is included on this. That's not has not been traditionally available in the mini or the microconverter line. So basically, this is kind of a bit of a game changer. So if you've got a situation where you only have 1080p monitors, but you're shooting in 4K, you can get these relatively inexpensive converters. It will do the down conversion for you, as well as converting from SDI to HDMI. And that conversion does work going HDMI to HDMI or SDI to HDMI either way. So it doesn't matter whether your signal is coming in on SDI or HDMI, it can still down convert to 1080p if the monitor that you're connected to or other display device is only capable of 1080p. Now, one thing that I should mention about the scaler that's in here is it only does resolution scaling. It does not change frame rates at all. So if you have a 60p signal coming in, you're always going to have a 60p signal coming out. So a very cool trick there that is unique to the 12G versions of these converters. I hope that I will have one of the SDI to HDMI 12G versions coming in, and I expect that it's going to have the same feature, but again, this is something that's new and unique to the 12G versions of these converters. Alright, so I'm going to demonstrate a couple of behaviors of this device when you have multiple inputs and outputs going on. So right now, it's going to be, I don't know if you can be able to see that. There we go. So I have video from my camera coming in SDI in, then I have my SDI out going to my switcher so that I can actually show you what's coming on the output of this. I haven't done that yet. And then I have HDMI output going to the monitor that I showed just a moment ago behind me. Now, I'm going to switch back to my main camera here. And what you're seeing on that monitor right now is coming from the SDI input, and then I'm going to take and I'm going to plug in HDMI input on here, which is coming from this laptop that's just in front of me. Now, actually, what's going to happen is you're not going to see any change on this monitor right here because this is now in dual conversion mode. So it's taking the SDI input, the camera, going to the HDMI output, which is this monitor, and then at the same time it's taking the HDMI input from this laptop and then converting that to SDI, which is going to my switcher. And if I switch over here, yeah, there you go. So now you're seeing the output of this laptop going through this device, being converted to SDI, going into my switcher at the same time that the video from my camera is going through this converter and being sent over to this monitor and being down converted to 1080p at the same time. So a lot of flexibility that's going on in here and a lot of power in a very small device. Now, let's take that one step farther and see what happens when I disconnect the SDI source from my camera. So when I disconnect that, we should see, there we go. And so now we're seeing the output of this laptop on this monitor behind me. And that's also being down converted. So this laptop is outputting a 4K signal over HDMI. It's being down converted to 1080p and then being sent over to this monitor at the same time that the 4K version of the signal is being sent to my switcher so that it can be displayed on this output or this input right here. A lot going on here. It's a very cool, very flexible, very handy product. Now let's talk a little bit about how this new one differs from the other products that are in Blackmagic's product line. Alright, so here I have the brand new 12G converter with the slightly older 3G version, and then I've got their HDMI to SDI 6G and SDI to HDMI 6G. So these products have been around for a couple of years now. They're kind of been the go-to for doing this sort of conversion. There are some similarities and there's some differences. So why would you choose one over the others? Well, first of all, price. If you want something that's going to be expensive, that's going to handle 4K, you're going to want to go directly to the bidirectional 12G version because it does most of the features that these other ones do for a lot less money. So as of the time I'm recording this, the SDI to HDMI is $185, the HDMI to SDI 6G is $145, the bidirectional is $149, and then the bidirectional 3G is under $100, I believe. So, so this is most of these two put together. So you're getting the flexibility and the power of these two converters in one box. There are some differences though. So first of all, these bigger ones are only 6 gig SDI, and if you need a 12 gig, you had to within Blackmagic product line, you had to step up to the Teranex Mini series. But if you only needed 6 gig, then these ones actually work just fine. You'll notice that these actually have more connectors on them. So let's compare it to the HDMI version first. So first of all, you got your HDMI input. You also have audio input. So if you need to replace the audio that's coming in on the HDMI with some other source, you're going to need to get this converter instead of the micro, because the micro does not have any audio connections on it whatsoever. The other thing that we mentioned is that there are actually 2 SDI outputs. So if you need to split that to 2 different locations, so you have one going to a switcher, one going to a recorder, whatever, the mini converter is going to be your way to go. So if we flip this over, we can see that there's a little chart on here telling us how to configure the dip switches that are on the device there. A configuration of this device is done through the dip switches. There's a couple of options you can set on the other converters in software, but with this one, everything is done with dip switches. And you can do things like select whether the audio coming in is either analog or AES EBU, and you're able to select between HDMI audio and the audio inputs. The other thing is you can actually set some dip switches here to change the EDID information that's sent by this to the connected device, to basically force that device or tell that device that, hey, I only accept Ultra HD or I only accept HD, so send me that instead. Whereas the microconverter, you have no control over that whatsoever. Now, let's go over to the SDI to HDMI 6G. So this is probably the most similar. In terms of connections, we've got HDMI output, and we've got analog or AES EBU audio outputs on here, so if we need to split the audio, run it somewhere else, we've got that. Another big difference is that on the right side of this, you actually have 2 SDI inputs, and the reason for that is for redundancy. So you've got a primary SDI input and then an alternate SDI input. And what happens is if the primary SDI input goes away for whatever reason, someone trips over a cord, the device shuts off, whatever, it automatically switches over to the alt SDI in. So if you need that additional level of protection and redundancy, these mini converters are going to be the way to go. Now if we flip it over, we've got more options here on the back. One of the primary differences in addition to analog is that this one will actually hold 2 lookup tables, color lookup tables at the same time. So you're able to switch back and forth between 2 different ones, whereas with the microconverter you're only able to do 1. And you're able to turn it on and off at will, whereas on the bidirectional, you can turn the individual inputs on and off, but you can't turn the lot off with a single switch. The other thing that this mini converter has is something that's called instant lock, which basically makes sure that the synchronization signal, the output signal going from this to the television, is never interrupted. And so if your SDI source is changing or it gets disconnected and reconnected, you're not going to find the TV having to resync to the signal. And basically what that's doing is it's delaying the signal internally so that the output pacing, the frame rate, is always consistent and never changes. So if you need that feature, you're going to have to go with the bigger version here. The other thing that I should mention, it's a little bit inconvenient for me as I've been playing with this, is that because the microconverter uses the same connection for power and for configuration, if you need to do configuration and you've got it plugged into a power supply, you're going to have to unplug it from your power supply in order to plug it into the computer to do the configuration. So if you have a signal that can't be interrupted, you probably want to go with one of the mini converters rather than the microconverter, or make sure that the converter is plugged into the computer that's going to be doing the configuration all the time, so you never have to interrupt that signal by unplugging it. The one other thing worth mentioning, probably not a big deal for most, is that the mini converter versions run on 12 volts, whereas the microconverters run on 5 volts on USB-C inputs. So if you want to power it from a battery pack and you've already got 12 volt packs, these might be a better choice, whereas if you want to use a USB battery bank, you can use those to power the microconverters quite easily. Now, in terms of differences between the 12G and the 3G version, I've mentioned most of those, but it's worth going over again. So first of all, the 3G version only does 1080p, whereas the 12G does 4K. Up to 4K, it'll do any SDI HDMI signal up to 4K at 60 frames per second. There's the 3G only goes up to 1080p at 60 frames per second, so there's that. The 3G version, if you're doing the lookup table feature, you have to get the standalone SDI to HDMI converter. The bidirectional version does not do that. The other issue is that on that particular product, the micro SDI to HDMI if you wanted to use the lookup table feature, it's only 17-point lookup tables, whereas the 12G uses the more standard 33-point lookup tables. So other than that, though, in terms of the way it converts signals, it's basically identical, with the exception of not having the built-in scaler that the 12G version does. So that's just going to about do it for the Blackmagic Design microconverter bidirectional SDI HDMI 12G. It's quite a mouthful, but it's also a product that does quite a lot of different things, and it seems to do them pretty well. So I've been playing with these for several days, and they have worked out just fine. So I plan to actually buy a bunch of these things and then keep them around everywhere I go. So I'll have some in my utility bag. I'll use some of them here in my trailer. I think they consume less power than the larger version, so that'll be a good incentive. And the fact that I'm able to do conversions in both directions simultaneously is super handy, so I'll be able to place these between computer and a display and be able to take the output of the computer, send it into my video switcher, have the output of the video switcher come back and get displayed on the monitor, all with a single device. That's very cool, very handy. If you have any questions about this, you can leave those in the comment section down below, or you can join us over on Discord. I have a Discord server set up, and the link to get there is djp.li/discord, and we've got a community there that's very anxious to answer questions and very helpful. So if you're planning on buying one of these, I really appreciate you using the link that's showing up there on your screen, so djp.li/12gmicro. And that will go a long way towards helping this channel and bringing in additional equipment for review here in the future. Now, I've also got the other versions of this converter on order, the HDMI to SDI and the SDI to HDMI. I'm just waiting for those to ship. I've placed orders with multiple vendors, and we'll see who gets them here first. I will do another video about those if there are any surprises, but if they perform exactly the same as this, you won't see another video for me about this topic. So yeah, just be on the lookout. If I do another video about these, it will be because there's something different about those other versions than there is with this one. So anyway, again, that's going to do it for now. So thanks everyone for watching, and have a fantastic day.